Folks, Canadian Prepper here. Guys, I appreciate all the well wishes and the messages you've been sending. I'm 95%. I'm feeling a lot better today. A lot of people are concerned about my health. They see me losing weight, and I have lost a bit of weight. Thank you very much. And that's the one good side effect of being sick on and off for the last few weeks, because my kids keep bringing home these viruses from school. And yeah, it hasn't been a good couple weeks. We've been moving a warehouse, moving to a new studio. On top of it all, I'm consuming copious amounts of bad news every day, which I'm relaying to you good folks. And it actually caught up to me the other night, to be brutally honest. I found myself in a state of anguish for the entire duration of a night, just because I just had consumed one too many bad bits of news that day. And everything just kind of hit me all at once, and it wasn't a good night. And of course, that made me even sicker the next day. So that has extended these illnesses. I'm testing negative for the you-know-what, but I'm still sick. And it's just this weird confluence of different viruses. I don't know if they're bacterial and viral at the same time or what. It's been nuts. Ever since the lockdowns lifted, they're bringing home all kinds of bugs, but we're going to get through it. So I appreciate it very much. And there's a lot of other people in this world who need your condolences and your thoughts and prayers much more than me. So let's focus on them. Now, a lot of the news that I'm going to share with you today, it strikes me as like this, okay, what else is new? But then I got to remind myself that a lot of the sources that we consult with here, be they open source intel sources or just alternative media, which is typically ahead of the curve, we usually get this news well in advance of the masses getting this news. So all this talk about Finland right now, we've been talking about that for over a month. The talk about how Russia might respond in such a situation, the situation on the ground in Russia with respect to what's going on in the Donbass. Typically the sources that we've consulted are obviously far more knowledgeable and more nuanced in their perspectives in the mainstream. And such, this all seems like old news to me, but it's, guys, it's been really scary to see what's been happening this week, especially in the markets. Today, the markets were down, I think, another 2%, and they kind of recovered last minute, but it would have been like one of the worst weeks in the stock market's history if the markets did not bounce back. And on top of that, of course, we have to factor in inflation. The inflationary figures came up, and we're now, at least for the past month, in a state of disinflation, which just means that the inflation rate is going down, but there's still inflation. So inflation was 1%, 1.5% last month. It's 0.5% or something like that to the effect this month. Now, the reasons for that and how they're measuring that is very suspect, of course, because, the things that matter, food, for some people, getting an automobile, a used car, fuel, obviously, housing costs, things of that nature, those recurring expenses, those prices are still going up, and they're still inflating at a much higher rate. But the other cost of other things like computers and this, that, and whatever are going down. And I'm guessing that the reason for that is that people simply don't have the money to either spend on it, or there's less people buying it because they're worried about their financial future. Thus, the reduction in demand is leading to the inflation easing in those markets, because there was inflation in those markets due to the chip shortage. But if people are just saying, hey, maybe if the reality's starting to kick in and they're saying, well, maybe we should, buy 6 months worth of food instead of a new 8K television set that we don't really need because we have a perfectly good working 4K one, unless it was one of those planned obsolescent products that has gone bad after 2 years. Maybe we should just stick with the 6 months worth of food, right? I would strongly recommend that. And definitely, look into those food and energy stocks. If you're a person who's still willing to look into the markets at this point, as we've been saying for many months now, food and commodities are the way to go. Anyways, guys, what's going on in Finland is concerning. And I'm going to tell you why. Here's the thing. In the last video, I talked about why Russia has such this huge border, like a massive, incomprehensibly large border to defend. And the idea that they can just mobilize troops overnight to any part of their country that they need to, and that they can, leave open huge parts of their border by China because, Russia and China are friends to the end, right? Wrong. It's not going to happen. What happens in war is that, your friends are your friends until they're your enemies. A friend I always mess this up. A enemy of my friend is my friend. No, a friend of my enemy is, oh my God, I feel like George W. Bush. I know what it is. Somebody's going to write it. 50,000 people are going to write it in the comment section. You know what I'm talking about, all right? That's what's going to happen. Okay, so what's going to happen is, Russia and China are going to do their thing, and if they win the war in the future, whatever the result of that is, then they're going to go to war with each other. It's just inevitable because China needs land and Russia's right there, and eventually China is going to match Russia in nuclear technology, and then there'll be another arms race altogether. But let's stick to the point. What I'm trying to say is that in the last video, I talked about how, they have a limited amount of military. Now, what's going on in the Donbass right now in Ukraine is Russia is making some very, very significant moves. And they're not talking about. We do not expect them to talk about it. Here's the thing. They are never, ever going to talk about any Russian successes. I don't want to call them victories because it's nothing I personally celebrate. I don't want to call it... it's Russia achieving their whatever goals they have, okay? And they are making key advances. And why it's so important, because that's where the cream of the crop, the heart of the Ukrainian military, who I must, commend. We must give those guys a lot of respect. They are going up against one of the toughest militaries out there, okay? You could say, the Taliban, the guys who fought against the U.S. in Iraq, they're fighting them asymmetrically. Even the Viet Cong, they're fighting asymmetrical warfare. You're fighting symmetrical warfare against the second most powerful army in the world. That takes balls, and they got my respect just for that. But the fact of the matter is, the Russians have been laying it on thick, and our media is not talking about it at all. It's just sunshine and rainbows. I go to some of these channels like news.au and The Sun, and it's just like nonstop, it's a gimme a break. People actually believe this, and then you get the channels with the talking robot voice that just spew these half-ass facts and put a bunch of B-roll over it, and everybody in the comment section is like, yay! People don't realize what the hell is going on, and this is why it's so scary. And remember when I talked about Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, when he said that the Russians may be using this as a training ground, for a greater, broader conflict. Think about what they're getting right now. They're putting hundreds of thousands of soldiers through this real-time training program, turning out very, very seasoned and knowledgeable, skilled soldiers that they can then, once they've solidified that position, because remember, Russia is a defensive army primarily, just like the Chinese, just like any army which has been restricted in its ability to project power because of the Pax Americana, the hegemony with all the aircraft carriers and all that stuff. Most of these countries, these semi-superpowers, have been forced to focus on defensive. So that's why they have the best missile defense systems in the world. Once they take some territory, as long as when the Russians retreat from a place, it's because they've recalculated that they need those forces elsewhere, or for whatever reason, where they're putting their attention is not worth taking at the time. And remember, it's like flank maneuver warfare. So you get your guys to pull back a bit, and then the army floods in there thinking they've won this part, and then you go and you hit them hard in another place, and then you go back into that place again, and this is how it's working right now. So what I'm saying is, as they make ground, and once they establish a comfortable boundary in Ukraine, whether that's from Transnistria to Odessa, Mariupol up to Kharkov, whatever the case might be, then that's when it's going to get scary for Europe, because all they do is they put some, defensive forces in there, of which you don't need that many. You don't need nearly as many guys, especially when you have their air defense systems. You simply don't. So then they can take those other guys, and then you have Finland up here with a border that's 1,300 miles long, who's now threatening to join NATO, I got all the documents here, but all of the, a lot of the top brass in Russia and former Russian politicians, including Dmitry Medvedev, have basically said that they need to take some sort of decisive military action, and they've threatened a military technical action. Now, Finland's a country of 5 million people who, as far as I know, haven't fought a war in recent history. Now, this is no disrespect to the Finns. This is just trying to keep it real for a second. Ukraine had 40 million people, all right? They had hundreds of thousands of guys who already had been put through the ringer, who had already been toughened up through years of fighting and war. They have a much bigger army. They have a lot more equipment. If Russia gets that situation under control to their liking, where they don't need as many resources there, even though the Ukrainians are starting to be more liberal in their offensive into Russian territory, which is another story we can talk about later, then, it's going to get scary for Finland. I think that's why they're rushing it. I think they realize that if the Russians get Ukraine locked down and they can pull back some of those forces and they can even redirect a fraction, Finland would be run through quickly, very, very quickly. 5 million people, I'm not sure how many people of fighting age you could bring to bear at that point. I just think you can't use, for starters, there's 1/8 the population, and then you have a population who is not as nearly proportionally militarily well equipped, and you also have the lack of experience with the soldiers. So I'm going to presume that Russia would just steamroll that place. That's what I think. Now, is there, and the problem with Finland is, and I don't know if this is just something I just thought of, and this is very important because I asked the question last time, why hasn't Kiev been taken out? And you guys answered. But in that video, I also talked about how Ukraine had recently cut off gas, because not a lot of people knew, but Russia transports most of its gas through Europe through a pipeline under the Ukraine. So this is why they wanted to do Nord Stream 2, to bypass that whole process, right? So they didn't have to basically pay transit fees to the Ukraine. Now, Ukraine, for some reason, finally just decided, hey, we're not going to let you transport this gas, which of course is great if you're trying to just kill Russia's economy, but it's also bad for the people, the countries who are supporting you, because they need that gas, right? So it all just made sense to me at that point in time that this is why Russia hadn't taken out a lot of the key critical infrastructure. For the longest time, we were theorizing about things like, they want to keep the critical infrastructure intact because they want to go in there afterwards and have, some spoils to reap. That was the argument that we've been saying for a long time now. Then when it came to the point where it was, clearly they're getting a much harder time than they anticipated, you would think that they would start to take out some of the major command and control in Kiev in order to expedite their special military operation, but they didn't. And now with this reminded me that, that's right, there's billions and billions of dollars flowing through these pipelines that if power was knocked out, these companies wouldn't be able to work together behind the scenes to keep this whole thing going, okay? So this tells you that there is still some, in spite of all of the political blah, 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 there still was big money being made behind the scenes. And remember, the Russians are gangsters, all right? Straight up. I don't like the term oligarchs and this and that. Putin's a gangster. Okay, and to be quite frank, most high-ranking politicians are gangsters in any country, democracy or otherwise. All right, let's be straight up about it. I mean, you got to be a little bit gangster to be in that kind of leadership role. I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be the president of the United States of America. It would be absolutely a nightmarish job. Don't know how they do it. Now, some people left some other comments about Kiev, and I want to share those with you. Okay. And I don't know if these are all the ones that I wanted to read here. Okay, here. Let's just see. Disrupts our timeline. Okay. Some people say that Kiev has significance to the Russian people. It's the center of the Kievan Russian Empire. That's maybe true. You know, that's something that people have thrown around. But if people get desperate, man, when it comes to winning or losing, I don't think that cultural stuff's going to mean a lick. I think it's more going to be about, you know, when it's talking about the preservation of your people now or some historical traditional stuff for the past, you're going to choose your people now. This one is kind of bullshit. The reason the lights aren't out in Kiev is because the Russians are dependent on the Ukrainian cell phone services for communication. That's a myth, just another, you know, Western myth. I like this one. I like your analysis, Nate, not because he said I like your analysis, Nate. But I think you're missing is throughout history, capital cities and heads of state were generally kept alive in order to coerce the population to surrender when they take the capital city. Russia does not want to do much damage to Kiev because they want it. Mark my words, the Second Battle of Kiev is nearing. Some people say I should be saying Kiev. I've heard people say Kiev for a long time, so whatever. Get over it. And here's genius comment. Maybe the reason Putin's keeping the lights on in Kiev is due to Ukraine allowing the pipeline to still flow west. Thanks for keeping us informed, Nate. Probably the best news briefing in Canada. I would not give myself that much, but thank you very much. Let's see what else we got here. There was one. Yes. Okay, so here's another interesting one. I believe the reason Kiev has not been taken out yet is because it is a one-on-one war strategy. If you want to draw your enemy in closer, which would be the United States and NATO, you don't kill their friend, you wound it. You get them to exhaust all the resources and supplies in the situation before you strike your coup de grace against them. Like you say, this is a game of attrition. Russia needs to draw down America's strength through this proxy war before they attempt a one-on-one with them. And that's a very good point because surprisingly, the Russian economy apparently grew in the first quarter, whereas the American economy contracted. And also the ruble is now up and the Chinese economy has grown as well in the first quarter. So it's not really working out that well for the US. Now the US dollar is up on the whole on the global stage, and that always happens in times of crisis because people go to the place of the most certainty. But, you know, once the chaos subsides and, you know, things ever go back to normal, I think the support level is going to be much lower for the US dollar as a result of all of the countries that have now started to buy stuff in rubles, okay? What else do we got here? There was one more. I just can't find it, guys. Okay, here, let's read one more. Militarily, it doesn't make sense for the Russians to leave Kiev and command and control untouched, but geopolitically, as long as Kiev stands and is working with and talking to the West, Russia can point to that as a continued justification for their invasion. It could be also that leaving Kiev standing is an intentional play to draw NATO into the war, potentially putting NATO on the ground in a position where they could be cut off from the forces that could come down from the north in Belarus. Think the British expeditionary forces at Dunkirk in World War II. Just my hypothetical thinking here. Anyways, these are things that should be being discussed or should be top of mind of these war analysts on, you know, DW News, Al Jazeera, WEON, all these places, all the places that get, you know, that are in the good books of the algorithm. They should be asking these questions, but they're not because we all know why. Okay, now, what are we going to talk about here? So, the choice of military attack in Sweden and Finland is on the table, especially as far as Finland is concerned. It seems like the Russian military has proposed to Putin immediate launch of a military operation against Finland in order to stop its NATO membership and to restore Russia's strategic security. 1,300 meters is a long border, and it's very significant as it's in the Baltic Sea and it's close to their Kaliningrad outpost. Now, yesterday, Putin's spokesman, Vladimir Soloviev, showed with a monologue that he was preparing the Russian people for a very difficult and extreme situation. He says that we can do one of few things. Either Putin will launch a military operation with conventional means in Finland. Either he will strike with a regular nuclear weapon. I'm not sure where he's referring to striking with a nuclear weapon. I don't see why they would strike anywhere in Finland with it. That just wouldn't make sense. Possibly utilizing a tactical nuke in Ukraine might cause everybody to put the brake on things, but it likely will have the effect of wanting these countries to want to join NATO even faster. Either or, he will pass the huge responsibility onto the next Russian president with whatever risk this will have for Russia itself. So the consequences, he claims, of Finland's accession would be, if Finland joins NATO and an anti-ballistic shield is placed in the country, Russia's nuclear missile launch zone will be threatened. Russia's nuclear arsenal will be in danger. Okay, so these are going to be the reasons why Russia is likely to either preemptively do something or do something immediately after the fact if they sign on the dotted line and if they are approved. At the same time, NATO will be able to place missiles there and strike bases, the bases of our nuclear submarines in the Barents Sea, and most importantly, in Severodvinsk, I can hear you mouthing it for me. Severodin, anyways, we're going to skip that one, which is more important to the Americans than St. Petersburg. At this point, and that's where the nuclear subs are, right? You want that. At this point, NATO will have the opportunity to strike first from both Norway and Finland. And at the same time, the entry of Finland and Sweden into the NATO bloc makes it possible to attack St. Petersburg and the Gulf of Finland from these territories. Finally, Kaliningrad is now isolated and in danger. The only defense is the nuclear weapons, which is justified on the basis of Russia's doctrine of a threat of a strategic nature. Now, this is, Putin's spokesperson, okay? Is that actually going to translate into them doing such a thing? Is Finland joining NATO something that they are going to deem one of those existential threats that justifies the use of nuclear weapons? Well, let's hope not. Let's hope time will tell. As I said, Dmitry Medvedev, a former Russian president and longtime ally of Vladimir Putin, reacted this morning to the news that Finland and Sweden are even closer to joining NATO. In the context of a proxy war waged by the Western countries and Russia, I want to state once again and with great clarity things that are already obvious to rational people. The supply of weapons, number one, the supply of weapons to Ukraine and NATO countries, the training of its troops to use Western equipment, the deployment of mercenaries, and the conduct of exercises by the alliance countries near our borders increase the possibility of a direct and open conflict between NATO and Russia instead of their quote-unquote proxy war. Two, such a conflict always runs the risk of turning into a full-fledged nuclear war. Three, this will be a catastrophic scenario for everyone. Finally, he called on the West not to lie to itself and others and not to drown in its own saliva in the frenzy of Russophobia. So, Medvedev is concerned. Russia warns of a response to Finland NATO entry. Russia has sent a warning that it would have to take technical military steps, whatever that means. Maybe that just means positioning a lot more, nukes along the border of Russia. and Finland. Steps in response to neighboring Finland joining NATO after leaders in Helsinki backed entering the US-led alliance. And remember, I can't remember if it was Finland or Sweden, but one of those countries said that they were going to do it. They were not going to consult the population because they would not allow it to be vetoed because it was it's a matter of national security, right? So there's things that they don't know that the population that they know that the population doesn't know, and so they're just going to go right ahead with it. Okay, U.S. producer prices jump 11% in April as the cost of food soars. Guys, we have a video coming out this weekend. It's a secret that I've been keeping for a while. It's a product that we have, and it's a product I consume all the time, okay? And we have a significant amount of it, and I'm going to share it with you, and you're going to love it. So stay tuned for that. We've got a lot of new products in, actually. We got these Arcturus very rugged but portable ponchos that are in Realtree camo. We're also working now with Maxpedition because you guys probably know Maxpedition. Anybody from the Nut and Fancy era on down knows Maxpedition because they were one of the first in the whole civilian tactical market. We sell VanQuest bags as well, but they're not going to have any inventory till the end of the year of their good stuff because it's all been sold out and the supply chain woes. So yeah, we got food for you guys coming. Yes, the price of food is rising. We all know starvation is on the horizon and it's not looking good. Now, I've heard mixed reports. I think India has had a successful export in spite of the heat that was damaging the crops. They're not a huge exporter of food, not nearly enough to make up for the lack of food that will now be shipped from the Ukraine and Russia. We're still in the beginning of the season. You know, anything can happen, natural disasters. So, you know, it's looking like it's going to get pretty bad. And yeah, this is the new dark age, guys. So just get ready. Where should we go next? We're going to go over to China in a minute. We're running out of time here, but we got a few minutes. I just want to talk about this Lithuania situation. So Russia is preparing to withdraw the recognition of Lithuania's independence from the Soviet Union, I believe. In light of the rapidly deteriorating relations between the two countries, this is a very, very bad development which, if implemented, paves the way for a conflict in the Baltic. The reason is because that Lithuania apparently has recognized Russia's actions in Ukraine as being, you know, genocidal and terroristic, and as such, Lithuania has recalled its ambassador to Russia, and I believe vice versa, I presume, and of course that sets the stage for a greater war in the Baltics. Now, in terms of what's going on in China, now I'm going to bite some rhymes from the open source intel guys. What's his name? Forward Observer. He actually wanted to do a collaboration. I'm probably going to do a collaboration with him. I actually really like his channel, Forward Observer. Very level-headed, you know, doesn't get his emotions involved, doesn't get, you know, into the patriotic brouhaha, just, you know, drops the facts. He was talking about the other day how the State Department removed mention of Taiwan on their webpage. You can go and find the news story, but this is very significant because it shows that the U.S. is beginning to move away from its past policy of intentional ambiguity over Taiwan, you know, strategic ambiguity. And now they're basically saying that, well, you got to go and see the change that was made. Basically, they no longer are acknowledging that Taiwan is a part of China, to make a long story short, which is not good because that's a sign that we're on a slippery slope. And he also talked about how China has achieved overmatch in space-based weapons, that they've made some significant advances in not only the hypersonic space, but also in, just their space program. They have their new space station circulating, which is much, much smaller than the ISS, but nonetheless, it looks like a pretty promising space station. And also, he talked about how the U.S. was considering bans on exports to Chinese chip makers. And apparently, U.S. still holds a lot of the keys to making chips. And China, of course, wants to manufacture their own chips so they can be self-reliant and make their own weapons and not have to, be dependent on the Taiwanese. Because if the U.S. can secure Taiwan, which is what it's looking like it's going to come down to, China's going to be SOL in terms of chip manufacturing, and they're going to be years and decades behind. And that's really what it boils down to in the end. I think it was Vladimir Putin actually who said, wasn't it him who said, whoever figures out AI will rule the world or something like that? So, these countries are really thinking about this because Taiwanese chip making is so far advanced of the rest of the world that whoever is allied with them is going to be able to make the best weapons. Now, satellites caught China preparing a lightning strike in the U.S. This is an interesting article, okay? So apparently, this situation in Taiwan is so real that the Chinese have set up an entire network of target models in the desert, which I'll just read here. Military satellites spy on Chinese army training in gruesome detail, long-range ballistic missiles against U.S. aircraft carriers, U.S. bases in Japan, Guam, and Taiwan, and the U.S. Satellite images show that they have set up training base in Zhejiang's remote Taklaman Desert. They've created a network of models showing a ship moored at a naval base that resembles one in northeastern Taiwan and other targets in Guam. And that these satellite images have large-scale targets, including destroyer models and piers. And so they are actively training to go to war with Taiwan in a way which, to the best of their capability, simulates the real thing. And this is just another one of those things that really would be an existential risk to some degree or another of the Chinese. And it's been speculated that, the Chinese economy is going to far outgrow the U.S. economy, probably double, if not triple, in size. I think that's what Elon Musk had suggested, triple in size, he said. So if you know that, the U.S. is going to try to do everything they can right now to get as far ahead or to set them back as many years as they can to try to keep the balance of power. Because once the Chinese if the Chinese are able to get the chip manufacturing capability that the Taiwanese have to offer, then it's off to the races for them. And they're just going to leave us in the dust technologically and otherwise. Now, the thing that the U.S. has going for it, in spite of it being a predominantly consumer-based, retail-driven society, they have a lot of resources, and it's a huge, vast country which is very usable, and it has all kinds of biomes. And unlike Europe, who's going to be shafted by all this, and who's getting shafted, who's taking it up the you-know-what. I mean, I feel bad for our European brothers and sisters because they're taking the brunt of this, and Washington doesn't have to, really shoulder any of the burden of all this. Well, the taxpayer will, in terms of all the money that they're sending over there that can't be paid back. But, it's the Europeans who are going to have these massively increased, inflated prices of fuel. There's going to be riots everywhere. You're going to see riots in the third world as a result of the cost of food. There's going to be wars waged pretty soon. I mean, we're already in a situation where there's water scarcity. You add food scarcity on top of that, and the situation is just going to be magnified. Then you're going to get massive influx of immigrants into Europe, which is going to fuel nationalism. And then, of course, you have nationalism. You have Germany, who's now arming up, right? And yeah, it's going to be an interesting 10, 15, 20 years if we make it that long. So all I'll say is just keep on prepping, guys, and stay tuned. We got a couple, we're getting back on track here now. Now that I'm over this illness, knock on wood, you know, we're going to get back to a lot of, we just got a really cool studio set up. We're going to be getting back outdoors and doing some stuff because I just want to enjoy things, you know, while they're still a little bit normal. I know things are going to get a lot worse, but I want to get out there. I want to do some fishing with my kids. You know, I want to go and set up some shelters in the woods, bust out the Silky Saws once again. You know, I want to be doing that fun stuff because this is just, you know, I mean, it's one thing to just be info prepper, but it's another thing to actually be out there doing stuff, be out there in the garden, you know, turning the soil, building the stuff, doing the stuff, getting the training, you know, just we got to stay active. For every hour of this kind of content we consume, we have to be doing triple that in our applied and actionable stuff. So anyways, guys, stay safe. Thanks for watching. And yeah, go check out CanadianPreparedness.com if you want to support the channel, and stay tuned this weekend because we got a very tasty video for you. Okay, stay safe.